start on time. It's an ethical issue. We start late, we punish the people who are here on time, we reward the latecomers. It's just an upside down world. It's a sign of the decay of our civilization, starting late. That's how I view it.
Here we go. We have hit the magic hour. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have an unbelievable and really exciting conversation, discussion, some music, some opportunities just to really do some fun stuff over the next hour or so. So thank you, everyone who took time out of your busy day. And I'm your host for today, Rabbi Rami Goldberg, here with my co-host, I guess, Rabbi Pesach Walicki. Thank you. And we will be going through, taking a couple of minutes to run through the seder, go through some of what makes Pesach, Passover special, how we do things as Jews, and kind of just take a deeper insight. Feel free to put any questions or comments or thoughts in the chat, and we will be able to try to address it, because it's going to be a little bit like kind of less formal and a little bit more of just a discussion between myself and Rabbi Pesach. And so that's what we are looking forward to taking care to doing today, and we'll go from there. So, Rabbi Pesach, why don't you take it away? I have over here the list of what we are going to be doing at the seder. Maybe you can tee it up and introduce what we're looking at.
Well, thank you, Rami, and thank you all of you for participating in this. And it's interesting that the Passover seder of all Jewish observances is one that many Christians have connected to, and it's understandable why. It's of course a biblical feast. It's the beginning of it all, of the nation of Israel, and for Christians it has a lot of resonance for other reasons that we're not going to get into necessarily. But I want to talk first about the word seder, which is what we call the Passover. I mean, it's not really a meal. There is a meal that is part of the seder. We'll get into that in a moment, but it's incorrectly understood to be going to a meal. Okay, the meal happens during the seder. The word seder literally is a very mundane word. It's not. It just means order, and I find that fascinating. That this is what it is called. It's what it is called in our. This is not just a. It's not just a figure of speech. A colloquialism. Going back thousands of years, this experience, that's a better word for it, Passover night, with everything that we're going to lay out here tonight and the whole order of it. And if you've been to a seder, there's a very carefully designed and tight order to the evening. It's interesting that the whole evening is called seder, which means, again, it just means order, the Passover order. But I think that speaks to something very deep, which is really the theme of the evening itself. Because Passover is the night, Passover night, the Seder night, is when we really focus in on God's dominion over history. Our relationship to God, we pray to God and we know that He's responsible for everything. He's the creator of the world. There's many different ways we encounter Him. But one of the most important ways that we see God acting in the world is God's dominion over history. And that is what became clear in the Exodus story, that God controls history. And to people who don't believe in a God who controls history, there is not necessarily any connection between what happened yesterday, what happens today, and what happens tomorrow. They believe in coincidences, or even different eras of history will just be studied as separate eras that are disconnected from other eras of history, almost like separate books in a library full of novels. But in the biblical perspective, and very much in the Jewish perspective of history, all of history is one story. It's one long sweep where God is in control of everything. And everything that happens along the way and all the ups and downs are all part of an order. And they have order. If something is in order, if you walk into a room and there's a bunch of blocks that are stacked up neatly, you know that they didn't fall that way randomly. You see order, you know that there was intent. So when we look at the world, when we look at history, and we recognize that God is in control, and we're now going to enter into a journey. The Seder is itself a journey. It's a journey through through the rituals, it's a journey into an awareness of God's dominion over history. So let me just go. So what we do, the very first thing we do at the seder, and it's actually part of the ritual, is recite the order of everything that will be done in the seder. Okay, and that's what you see up on your screen now. This is usually one of the first pages of every Haggadah. The Haggadah is the book, is the liturgy, the book, and there are. Here's an interesting piece of trivia. There are more commentaries written on the Haggadah than there are on the Bible. So many commentaries are written on the Haggadah. Every year, more and more commentaries are written. Every rabbi's got a commentary they write on it. Rami, how many Haggadah commentaries do you have in your own personal library?
I probably have 20 or 30, but I have a very small collection.
And that's normal. That's normal. People will have, I have shelves at home of commentaries and there's a reason for that, because every single Jew for thousands of years has engaged in a deep study of this text once a year. And therefore, people have their own insights. They have, and there's so much written on this. But at the opening of every Haggadah, we have this list. And let me go through it here. So this is the order of the evening.
Rabbi Pastor, just before you go into it, in terms of that, I think it's like, I heard just an amazing kind of idea in terms of what we're passing down. If you imagine that it's been about 3,300 years since the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And imagine about 25 years per generation. That means there's been 132 generations since Mount Sinai until today. So for 132 generations, they have all passed that down so lovingly and carefully to me and to you. And we have to now take that story and pass it on for the next 132 generations, right? And so we are the linchpin within that. So yeah, we're all telling the same story, but with our own kind of twist and our own story. That's just,
for sure. And that, again, that, there is no question that this night, the Passover Seder night, is the most profound single experience that Jews have, and everyone remembers it from childhood. It has a deep impression. There are Jews who keep nothing else, but they do a Passover Seder. It is the connective glue of the Jewish people. And the inherent in the Jewish experience, being a Jew, Jewish identity, and here for all of you who are listening here who are not Jewish, I want to get you inside some of the existentially what it's like as a Jew. That is, our fundamental covenantal relationship to God is experienced by Jews to a great extent through our awareness of history. We teach through all of our rituals and all of our liturgy from the youngest age, children are made aware of this great sweep of history and are taught to see their own lives as links in the chain in this great sweep, this single story. That's what I was saying earlier. We don't see history as compartmentalized into different stories and different eras. We see it as one sweep, one chain of events of cause and effect. And it's that perspective that also gave such strength to the Jews for thousands of years in exile. How did they hang on? I often marvel at it. It's so easy for us today, Rami. We're seeing the ingathering of the exiles. We're part of it. So many of the biblical prophecies that thousands of years of Jews living in dispersion and exile were just sitting around, hopefully saying, yes, one day it will happen. And then century after century, nothing ever happened. And we're the lucky ones who get to live in a time when we see these things. So it's actually easy for us to believe in a God who has dominion over history. And I stand in awe and humility when I consider these centuries of Jews, those many generations who didn't have the luxury of seeing prophecy fulfilled, and yet their faith in that prophecy being fulfilled was unwavering. And it's only because of them that we're here today. And the Passover Seder is a critical piece of that. It is fundamentally an educational experience. This goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 13 and 14, right there at the very beginning when the Exodus is first happening. One of the first commandments God gives the nation of Israel right after the Exodus is that you must teach this to your children. You must teach this to your children. This story, the story of the Exodus from Egypt, must be taught to your children. Meaning the initial commandment to teach one's children is to teach the children about the Exodus. Think about that. The first time God tells people to teach children, he's telling them to teach the Exodus story. And specifically on that day. Which day? This day, the 15th of Nisan, the day that will be ushered in Wednesday evening. There's a specific biblical commandment to teach children the Exodus story on the day that it happened. And that really is, if I was to pull out two sentences that really exemplify what the Jewish identity is in terms of this awareness of the God of history, it's encapsulated in that. Teach your children that God controls history, that God has a plan for the nation of Israel, and that God is our Redeemer. These are the critical components. So
Pesach, I'll just tell you, well, I was speaking to a cousin of mine actually earlier today, who maybe a little less religious in terms of his upbringing, and he asked me, "Do I believe that the temple is going to be rebuilt?" I said, "Do me a favor, go ask your grandfather, your great-grandfather from 150 years ago, who was living in Chust, Poland, in Chust, Ukraine, or Czechoslovakia, whatever it was at the time." I said, "Ask him if the Jews are going to be together." You know what he's going to say to you? Of course they will. I don't know what's going to happen. But he couldn't really even imagine that such a thing would happen. So I said, of course the temple is going to be rebuilt. That's right. Just seeing God in history. You're talking about recognizing this moment that we're in. And we have a hard time. Will the temple really be rebuilt? What's going to look like? Oh my gosh. But yes, you're by looking at history, you're able to, kind of draw conclusions going forward.
That's right. If God has kept his promises up till now, that looked completely impossible for a long, long time, we have no problem believing he's going to keep the other seemingly impossible promises. So, So let's take a look at this list. You see here, there's 15? 15 steps in the Passover Seder. And I'm going to run through them real quick. And then, and I'll say a few things about each one. And that's really what we're going to talk about tonight. This is our agenda. Okay. So we start off the evening with what's called Kadesh. Now, Kadesh, that word might sound a little familiar. It might, to some of you, familiar with the word Kiddush from Shabbat. That's the same thing. Kiddush means sanctification, declaring the holiness. Kadesh is more of a command form of the same word. So that is what we're told. We are going to declare the sanctity of the day. And that's how we begin every Sabbath or festival meal. We declare the sanctity of the day. And then after we do that, we then wash our hands. Now, generally, if you've ever been to a Shabbat dinner, after we do Kiddush, we wash our hands and then we start the meal. But this time, we're not washing our hands to start the meal. We're washing our hands, and then all we're having is item number 3 on the list, karpas. Now, this isn't even a Hebrew word. It's a Persian word or an ancient Aramaic word, somewhere one of those dialects. It's actually in the Talmud itself. They're unsure about the origin of the word. That's how old this word is. This word karpas, but it's clearly not a Hebrew word. And what it refers to is a small bit of vegetables that we eat, but less than a full portion. Just a little bit of a teaser for the palate that we're going to have right at the beginning of the meal, and we dip it in salt water. So let me explain what this is about. If you have a tiny little bit of food and you're hungry, have you ever had this situation where, you could eat, you're ready to eat, and maybe you're a little bit hungry, but then as soon as the food is put out and maybe you have one little bite, only then do you realize how hungry you actually were, right? So when you eat a tiny little bit of food, especially something like a little piece of green vegetables or something like that. That's what we usually eat, a piece of celery or maybe a little piece of boiled potato, some little piece of vegetable. It stimulates the palate and it makes you want to eat more. So it actually makes us hungry. But we also dip it in salt water. Salt water to remember the tears of the Jews who were slaves in Egypt. The combination of these two things, we're making ourselves hungry for more. We feel more needy at that point, and we're recognizing the tears in Egypt. This is kind of a sad moment in the Seder. But that speaks to how the whole Seder is built. So now I'm going to give away a little bit of the punchline of all this. The Seder is actually built in 3 major sections. All of these 15 parts really divide into 3 big themes of the night. The first theme of the night is the past. The second theme of the night is the present. And the third theme, you guessed it, is the future. That's the structure of the Passover Seder. So at the beginning of the Passover Seder, we're starting by talking about the suffering. We're having something with salt water. We're stimulating our appetite, but then we're not bringing the food out, which almost makes us suffer a little bit, right? That's what we're doing at the beginning of the Seder, and that's what we do with karpas. And we continue with this same theme of envisioning ourselves as in the suffering, in the exile, in difficult times, salt water, tears, hunger. And we take one of the matzahs on the table and we break it in half. What are we doing? We break it in half and we take the larger half, the larger piece. When you break a matzah, it never breaks exactly in half. And we take the larger piece and we wrap it up and we put it aside. Why do we do that? The reason is very clear. When someone's poor and doesn't know where their next meal is coming from, and all they have is one loaf of bread, they don't eat the whole loaf for dinner because they don't know how much food they're going to have tomorrow. They probably don't even eat more than half of it. In fact, they probably eat less than half of it. And then they put the rest away just in case, because they don't know where their next meal is coming from. So continuing on the theme that the early stages of the Seder, we're envisioning ourselves in the suffering, and it's not only about Egypt. This is another key point about the Passover Seder. The Passover Seder, we're talking about the suffering and exodus from Egypt, but what we're really talking about is we're using that story to really contemplate all of the suffering throughout Jewish history and the redemption from that suffering ultimately. Meaning we're using the Exodus story as a template to talk about the entire experience of Jewish history. Yeah, Rami, what's on your mind?
Yeah, so I think it's also important to note, you spoke a bit about how this is a night of education. A lot of education, it's multi-sensory, the entire night, meaning you have the sight, you're looking at the matzah, there's the feel of the matzah, you then are tasting the tears, you're breaking it. It's like, it's not just, do as I say, when it comes to that type of education, where it's just kind of father says and listen, kids, but it's that they should really be experienced and pulled into the story in a very meaningful way. So I think that's also part of all of these different steps.
Yeah, and one of the dictums of the sages about this night, which is quoted in all our books going all the way back to the Talmud about Passover, is that everyone, in the Hebrew, it's chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, this is what it's, in every generation, everyone is obligated to see themselves as though, every one of us should see ourselves as though we too came out of Egypt. What's the point? That doesn't just mean play acting or imagine yourself living back then. It's saying, look at your own life and use the ideas of the Exodus from Egypt, that things start often with hardship, and they often start, and there's suffering along the way. And we cry out to God, and God intervenes, and God liberates us from bondage. Meaning this whole story, we need to identify ourselves as part of that story. And that's how we really connect with the God of history, with God, with how God operates in the world in that way. Now, after we've broken that matzah, which is, again, we're acting like we're poor and we're slaves and we don't know where our next meal is coming from. We just drank some salt water, or didn't drink. We had a piece of herbs dipped in salt water. We're poor, we're crying, right? That's the early stages of the Haggadah. And then we get to maggid. Maggid literally just means telling it, like telling or speaking. And it's where we tell the story. And it's the centerpiece of the evening from the educational perspective, from the non-experiential educational perspective. And that is where it is obligatory upon parents, as the Bible says, to teach their children the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And in this section, we tell the story of the Exodus, and we talk about the need to tell the story of the Exodus. And at the very beginning of it, we actually talk about how we're going to do it. And one of the obligations that is laid out early on, thousands of years ago. By the way, the Haggadah text is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, rabbinic text that we still have, and we still use the full text of. Meaning, even our prayer book or the Talmud or the Mishnah, these ancient texts are not as old as the Haggadah. The Haggadah is very, very old text that was put together by the rabbis to tell the story using verses from the Bible, of course. They're telling the story of the Exodus. But right at the beginning of it, it talks about how to tell the story. And we'll get into that in a moment. I just realized I left out one piece. Right before we get into the how to tell the story, there's a paragraph that was written that's in Aramaic, which instructs us to open our homes to invite people who may not have anything to eat into our homes for the seder. And the Passover seder is a time when a lot of charity is given. Leading up to Passover, there's a widespread custom to give extra charity to help families that are needy. Passover is an expensive holiday, and a lot of needy families have an extra hard time at this time of year. So there's a paragraph there that's an ancient paragraph written in Aramaic that we recite that is all about the necessity to recognize what we have here, that we're eating the bread of affliction that our forefathers ate when they were slaves. And we have to remember that, and we have to open our homes and welcome people in. Rami, you want to add to that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we often, when we talk about joy and happiness that we're supposed to have on the holidays, our joy is never complete if it's just a matter of us. It's a matter of us and our families. And one of the things that we are doing at Israel 365 is trying to help as many needy families as possible. We have a lot of people on this call. I'm going to share a link which shows up on the left side of your screen to donate for anyone who would like to join with us. We are really looking for as many people, and whether it's $10, $100, or $1,000, to everyone according to what they're able to do. It's on the bottom left-hand of your screen, or if you're on a phone, it's actually on the bottom right-hand side. So anyone who could go ahead and to help support. Obviously, this is really the main aspect in many ways of the entirety of the seder, is to make sure that others are taken care of. Obviously, we do this now beforehand, and we help to distribute the money rather than waiting till later. So anyone can contribute. I put that link there. So Rabbi Pesach, please continue.
Yeah, thank you. And it's just a great way to help out needy families right now, especially at this time of, with this war going on. A lot of people, a lot of families who have a difficult time making ends meet are having an even more difficult time because a lot of businesses are shut down. Kids are home from school. A lot of young families, the husbands have been called up to reserve duty. There's a lot of struggles going on right now, and the Passover holiday is coming in a couple days. And Israel 365 is really, we're plugged into all the right charities. And if you just click that button, you can help out some of the needy families in Israel. That's a great way to participate. So right after we do that, we start with this educational experience of telling the story, telling the Exodus story. And we don't go into the greatest of length, otherwise it would go on for hours and hours. Some people do delve into it and make it last hours and hours, but it's quite a number of pages. But right there at the very beginning, and this goes all the way back. This text, like I said, this text is about 2,500 years old at least. This text of the Haggadah, and the sages instructed us. They said the way that you teach children is through questions and answers. When kids ask questions, that's when they're really paying attention. That's when they're really hearing the answers. So there's an instruction right there in the Talmud. It says that the children should ask and the parents should answer. And if the children don't know how to ask, the parents should teach their children how to ask questions. Because once you get a child asking questions and being inquisitive, that's when the educational experience is really most effective. So the opening of the maggid is traditionally the youngest child in the house. The youngest child who's old enough to be able to say it. Obviously, an infant can't. But the youngest child in the house reads what's called the 4 questions, and there's usually a tune that it's sung to. And Rami is going to share that with us.
Here we go. I'm not the youngest. I'm the middle child, so it was always my sister's responsibility. But This is the tradition that we have, and this is a very, very old song, but it is sung with gusto in every single kindergarten throughout Jewish homes throughout the world. So you'll take a look at the transliteration over here, and I've given you in English. Hayma nishana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot mikol haleilot shebechol haleilot anu ochlim chameitzu matzah chameitzu matzah halayla hazeh kula matzah halayla zeh kula matzah.
All right. Well, thank you, Rami. And then he just did one of the 4 questions. So there are 4 questions the child asks, and obviously that's just the stated questions that are in the text of the Haggadah. But generally, a lot of the whole approach to the Haggadah, to the stage of the Haggadah, is the parents will do many things to stimulate questions in the children, to get them to ask questions. And there's even things that we'll do in the seder to that might look a little confusing, just to get kids to ask more questions and to pay more attention. It's the most interactive evening of the year for kids, and a lot of parents will put a lot of effort into coming up with all kinds of visual aids and things that will get the kids to ask more questions. We tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt, again, using verses in the Bible, going through all the key elements of the story, but there's that great emphasis on each one of us seeing ourselves in the story. So in the middle of that, we also have a paragraph that references the fact that in every single generation, there are those who will rise up to try to destroy the Jews. And it's not the same people in every generation. Look at our own last century, where we have the Nazis in Germany, and then we have these jihadists in the Middle East. There's always someone coming around the corner who's got it in their head that they want to wipe out the Jews. And every single time, God finds a way to save us from their hands. And there's a paragraph that we say in the middle of the Haggadah. And I'm bringing this up just to emphasize that the Haggadah is not only about the Exodus from Egypt. It's using the Exodus to speak about the entire experience of Jewish history. So this is all part of maggid, but the main emphasis of the storytelling is on thanking God and having gratitude to God for everything he's done for us. And so much so that one of the most peculiar things about the Haggadah is that it is telling the story in detail of the Exodus from Egypt. It goes through all the 10 plagues, it goes through everything that happened in the Exodus story, the suffering and Pharaoh and all that. And believe it or not, it does not mention Moses by name. Moses is never mentioned in the Haggadah, and that might seem bizarre. How do you tell the story of the slavery and Exodus from Egypt without mentioning the main character? Could you imagine if someone told you to write the story of the Exodus, but do it without mentioning Moses even once? It almost seems like an impossible task. But think about why the sages did that. They did that because they wanted to make sure that we understood that whoever God's messenger was at any particular time, it's God. It's God who's saving us. We have to remember that it's God. So the sages deliberately de-emphasized Moses, so much so that, again, he's not even mentioned in the Haggadah, so that the evening is really all about focusing on God who redeems us. And it was I believe they also did it because, again, the purpose of the Haggadah is not to study history. It's to inspire us to see ourselves as part of history. And therefore, I think that the sages also wanted to emphasize that it's all about God, so that people would not be looking around for which human being is going to come along and save them from their troubles. That's not a healthy way to live, but rather would turn our attention to God himself. So that's a major theme of the Haggadah. As we're telling the story, we're constantly referencing that God did this for us, and God did this for us, and thanking God for every step of the way. And the climax of that, right towards the end of the telling of the story in the Haggadah, and it's much too long for this webinar. Go ahead and find a Haggadah. You can find the text online and read it yourself. But at the climax of that whole story, there's a beautiful hymn. There's a beautiful poem that is sung. And it's one of the highlights also of the singing. It's got a lively tune that Rami's going to share with us. And the song is called Dayenu. That is the refrain is just this one word. If you take a look on your screen, you'll see this one word that keeps repeating all the way down the middle column there. And the word Dayenu means enough. Dayenu means it would have been enough for us. And what this song does is it goes through all of the things that God did for us during the Exodus from Egypt. You know what? I'm going to pull it up here. Hold on a second. I'm going to pull it up here. So on my own screen. So let me read through it for you very quickly. And this is what this poem sounds like. Had God taken us out of Egypt and not punished the Egyptians, that would have been enough for us. Had God punished the Egyptians but had not destroyed their gods, that would have been enough for us. If he had destroyed their gods but had not killed their firstborn, that would have been enough for us. Had he killed their firstborn but not given us their wealth, that would have been enough for us. Had he given us their wealth but he had not split the sea for us, that would have been enough for us. Had he split the sea for us but had not brought us across it on dry land, that would have been enough for us. Had he brought us across it on dry land and not drowned the Egyptians in it, that would have been enough for us. Had he drowned the Egyptians in it and not supplied all of our needs in the desert for 40 years, that would have been enough for us. Had he supplied all of our needs in the desert for 40 years and not fed us the manna from heaven, that would have been enough for us. Had he fed us the manna from heaven and not given us the Sabbath, that would have been enough for us. Had he given us the Sabbath and not brought us to Mount Sinai, that would have been enough for us. Had he brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, that would have been enough for us. Had he given us the Torah and not brought us into the land of Israel, that would have been enough for us. Had he brought us into the land of Israel and not built the temple, that would have been enough for us. Now, this is a very strange thing to say. It almost makes no sense. What do you mean? Had you split the sea but not brought us across it, that would have been enough? What good is splitting the sea if we're not going to cross it? Had you brought us to Mount Sinai but not given us the Torah, what would that have been like? You bring us to Mount Sinai, we stand around, and then we go home? It's a very strange song. But when we say it would have been enough for us, what the song really means is saying even that would have been enough for us to have a reason to thank God. And the point of this poem is that with every step of the journey, every step itself is a reason to thank God. When we say it would have been enough for us, it doesn't mean we would have been totally satisfied and our lives would have been perfect. Of course, if God took us out of Egypt but didn't give us the Torah and didn't give us the Sabbath and didn't give us a temple or the land of Israel, we wouldn't be happy. What it means is that every step of the journey, all by itself, is reason enough to praise God. We don't only praise God when the journey is complete. We don't only praise God when everything's perfect and in its place, when we reach the finish line, when we're totally satisfied with the outcome. No, we praise God for every step of the journey. Every step of the journey is reason to praise him. And this really is also one of the highlights of every seder, is singing Dayenu. Rami?
So just before I sing it, I want to share that in my house, one of the things that I did a number of years ago is I wrote out my family history through this song. Well, had it only been that my grandmother was saved in the Holocaust, it would have been enough. Had it only been that she came to America, had it only been that my father was born, had it only been, and just go through, because as Rabbi Pesach just pointed out, it's all a matter of thanking God at each step. And I'll say one other thing. One of the main texts that we have within the Haggadah are the verses that tell the story in Deuteronomy, which actually talks about the first fruits. And the first fruits, if you think about what are the first fruits? First fruits are, as a farmer, I don't know how the rest of the year is going to turn out. This first cherry that I have on the tree, I turn to God and I say, God, thank you. But I don't know how the rest of the crop is going to be. I don't know how the rest of the yield is going to be. Maybe it's not going to be good enough. but I thank God at each step along the way. And that's really what we always need to do. And, sometimes people ask me, how are things going in Israel? And it's like, they're going amazing and terrible all at the same time. But we thank God for each rocket that is shot down, and each time that assignment doesn't happen, and each time we go out to battle, each time we kill one of our enemies, and on and on and on, we thank them each one. So I'll share a little bit of the song. We generally sing the whole thing, but in the interest of time, I also put before, by the way, a link to a YouTube video for Manishtana. So if you'd like to listen, and I'll put one for Dayenu after this. Ilu hotzi hotzi anu mi mitzrayim hotzi anu mi mitzrayim dayenu. Ilu hotzi hotzi anu mi mitzrayim hotzi anu mi mitzrayim dayenu. Dayenu sing along, everyone.
Rami, I gotta hand it to you. Playing live music in front of an audience that is in a webinar and you can't hear them, it's got to be tough. But I guarantee you, everyone on this call is enjoying themselves, and you got a happy audience. But it's really a very powerful thing. I just want to make sure that we fully appreciate the depth of this theological lesson, this spiritual lesson, to bring it into our lives, to bring this lesson into our lives, that we have to be thanking God for every step of the journey, even though we could also interpret and say, well, it's actually incomplete. Because once you get into that, everything's incomplete. If you want to look at it negatively, you could look at everything as incomplete. Well, even though I have this, I don't have that. And even though I finished this, what's going to happen after that? I mean, you can always have doubts and feel like things aren't complete, but then you're never going to end up thanking God for anything, because you're never done. And we have to appreciate that once we understand that God has a plan and that God is in charge, then we recognize that every single step of the way is actually a blessing from God. It's part of what he's doing. And we recognize the value of each and every step unto itself. That is what Dayenu was all about. And like I said, it is really the climax of the maggid portion. It's not the end of the maggid portion. There's a little bit more that we say. But that's the main section of the evening where we're telling the Exodus story. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation tonight that the seder is set up as past, present, and future. The beginning of the seder, we talked about the suffering. We talked about we had the salt water. We're talking about the slavery. We're telling the story. We're very much focused on the past. We are definitely trying to see ourselves in that story. And I have to say that Judaism, living a Jewish life, it's a pretty successful endeavor in terms of seeing ourselves in history. Jews have a very strong sense of our history. It's really it's the greatest strength that has kept us going. It's having a real sense of being plugged into that history. And that's what the beginning of the Seder is like. And after we finish Maggid, that's right here, right after we finish Maggid, we have to take a look at the list. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the fifth item on the list. We then wash our hands again. Okay, the second hand washing, now we're finally ready for the meal. Okay, so this is what I call the present tense part of the Passover Seder. Okay, see, usually on all other holidays, even though we have festive meals, the festive meal happens after whatever worship service or praise service or whatever ritual there is, right? So like on Tabernacles, on Sukkot, I'll go to synagogue, and we'll have a whole synagogue service, and we'll say special prayers because it's Tabernacles, and then we'll go home and we'll have a festive meal. Same thing on Rosh Hashanah. I'm in the synagogue, we're blowing the shofar, we're praying, and then I go home and I have a festive meal. Here, the festive meal is embedded in the key worship ritual, which is this Passover Seder, because This is different. We've just told the whole story, and now what we're going to do is we ourselves are going to do our part experiencing Passover ourselves in our own lives. And we do that through having this festive meal and taking part in the various foods that symbolize and remind us of certain aspects of that story. Okay, so fulfilling the commandments, because the things that we eat, the items that I'm about to show you, are actually commandments right there in the Bible, right there in the Torah. They tell us we're told to eat these things. So we wash our hands, and then motzi, we take out the matzahs, we take them out, and there's the matzah. And it's not just that we're eating bread with the meal and the matzah replaces the bread. We have a special blessing that we say over the matzah. It's a special obligation to eat matzah because of what it represents, because it reminds us of the slavery in Egypt. It's also bread that is, shall we say, humble. It's humble bread. It's not puffed up with hot air, right? And it's an interesting fact that a lot of people miss this when they know that we eat matzah on Passover. What a lot of people don't realize is that in the temple, with the exception of one day a year, there was never any leavened bread in the temple. All the bread in the temple was not leavened. Now, you might be wondering, what about the showbreads that were on the table? The showbreads were not leavened. That might come as a disappointment to you if you figured that they were these big, puffy loaves of white bread. They were not. They were unleavened bread. They were like matzah. Now, admittedly, matzah back in the day, and still in some communities like the Yemenite Jews, matzah was more like a tortilla or what you call a laffa in Israel, meaning it was softer than the hard matzahs we have. But the point is that it's unleavened bread. That's the key here. The tradition became to make the hard unleavened bread like cracker-like matzahs, but they don't have to be hard. But either way, it's bread that's not leavened. And throughout the year in the temple, no leavened bread was ever brought in. Right there at the beginning of the book of Leviticus, when it introduces the offerings in the temple, all the sacrifices in the sacrificial order, one of the commandments there is that there shall be no leavened bread at all in the temple service. The only exception we have for it is on Pentecost, on Shavuot, where there's 2 loaves of bread that are brought in as an offering to God on that day alone. And that's a whole other topic that we're not going to discuss today. Maybe we'll do another webinar before Shavuot and we can talk about why. But my point here today is that when we are not having leavened bread, we're actually and this is lost on a lot of people. A lot of Jews don't realize this. Our homes are becoming like the temple. Another way we see that is when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, was slaughtered. It wasn't really a sacrifice in the sense that it wasn't burnt for God. It was eaten by the people. But that offering, that's a better term for it. In Egypt, what happened to the blood? Well, we all know what happened to the blood. It's very famous. It was smeared on the home itself, on the doorposts of the home. What happens to the blood of an offering in the temple? It's sprinkled on the altar. And the Jews were also commanded right there in Exodus 12 that when they eat the offering that night, they're not allowed to leave their homes. Well, look at the temple. Offerings that were eaten in the temple courtyard. What's actually happening at the Passover is that we're treating our homes like a miniature temple. There's no leaven. The blood is sprinkled right here like our home is the altar. We're in the presence of God in a more intimate way than we've ever been. That's what we're doing. Go ahead, Rami.
Just to take that one step further, the word that is used for the holidays is called moadim. A moed is a meeting point. It's a meeting point. It's a point where we get together with God and we bring God in. Moses would go out to the tent of meetings, which that's called the Ohel Moed. That is just like the moadim that we connect with God. So it's always, our holidays are always a matter of connecting and bringing God into everything that we're doing. And the temple is the place that was done most acutely.
Yeah, and this is also an experience where, at the Passover Seder, just to go even further, at the Passover Seder, in temple times, at the Passover Seder, they would actually eat the Passover offering at the Seder. That was the food that they ate. It was actually a meal where you're eating a temple offering at the meal. So the home really is becoming kind of a miniature temple on the Passover. So it's very unique. So what we do now, after we eat some matzah, we don't just then bring out the main course and eat. What happens next is we eat the bitter herbs. The bitter herbs in the Bible, in the text of the story, there in Exodus, and then again in Deuteronomy, it mentions that when the Passover offering, when that lamb meat is eaten, it's supposed to be eaten with matzah and with bitter herbs together. Now, obviously, we don't have a temple today, so we don't have the roasted lamb. We don't have the wonderful offering, and we yearn for it, and it's missing. We'll get to that in a moment. But let's talk about what the bitter herbs mean. The bitter herbs are very important. First of all, it's a biblical commandment to eat the bitter herbs. But we have these three items: the matzah, the bitter herbs, and the roasted lamb meat of the Passover offering. And the roasted lamb meat of the Passover offering obviously represents redemption. That was the redemptive moment, both in terms of taking this animal that was worshipped by the Egyptians and slaughtering it, which was a sign of rebellion against the Egyptians. It was also the first offering to God. And it's also called the Passover offering. And that word Passover makes reference to God protecting the people of Israel the night that he was killing the firstborns and redeeming us from Egypt. That represents freedom and redemption. That was not something the Jews could have done when they were still slaves. The matzah represents our humility, that, God's in control. We're not all puffed up, right? It's this simple bread, and God, so it's this bread of humility, the bread of affliction. It represents our suffering as well. Maror represents what the Egyptians did to us, that the Egyptians made our lives bitter. And we have to remember that. We have to remember that the Egyptians made our lives bitter, because without suffering, no pain, no gain, they say. There has to be some bitterness in order for the sweetness of the redemption to really be felt. So even as we're celebrating, and even as we're eating the Passover offering, if in temple times, and God willing soon we'll be able to do that again, we have to include, the Torah tells us, you can only eat that if you also have the bitter herbs. You can't have redemption without the suffering that precedes it. And without it, the two things go together. So we remember all the bitter things that the Egyptians did to us. We eat the bitter herbs. And then what we do is after we eat the bitter herbs, we take the matzah and the bitter herbs, and we have another portion of matzah and another portion of bitter herbs, but we eat them as a sandwich. We eat them together. Now, originally in temple times, this sandwich also had a piece of the Passover offering in it, and it was all eaten together to fulfill that verse that they're all supposed to be eaten at once, those three items together. But we don't have it anymore. So instead, we just recite a text right before we eat it that reminds us that we're trying to reenact as best as we can what was done in temple times. And that, but for me and for my family, what I always emphasize to my kids is, imagine if someone said, here's your roasted lamb sandwich, here's your hamburger, and they handed you a bun, and it was a bun with lettuce and tomato and ketchup and whatever else you like in your burger, but no meat. Your first question would be, where's the beef? Like, where's the meat? What are you giving me? This isn't a hamburger. And if you took a bite of it, you'd immediately be struck by the lack of meat. And so that's actually, in a way, there's a sadness there. When we eat this sandwich of matzah and maror, which is romaine lettuce, it's because it has that bitter stalk in the middle. That's the traditional maror. Some people use other bitter things, but the traditional maror is romaine lettuce because of the bitterness of the stalk. When we eat it, our main sensation is that we're missing the main thing. We're missing the roasted lamb in this roasted lamb sandwich. So it reminds us that the temple is not yet rebuilt, and we yearn for it. And then we take out and then we have what's called shulchan orech, which means set table. And then we bring out the rest of the meal and we celebrate. So this whole section of the seder,
usually by that point you're so full of matzah and maror.
That's right. We haven't even mentioned the fact that there's 4 cups of wine throughout
12
this whole
o'clock at night. But
yeah, there's also, you probably heard, there's also 4 cups of wine that are drunk. One of them was at Kiddush at the beginning. One of them was at the end of Maggid. I left this out a little bit. And then we're going to eat our meal. After the meal, we'll have our 3rd cup of wine. As we bless God, we thank God for the meal, which we do after every meal. And that is what I would call the present tense time of the Passover Seder, where we're experiencing it for ourselves. We're reenacting. We're envisioning ourselves as being participants in the Passover service in temple times, even though it's not temple times. But we have a sense of reenactment going on. And then what we do is right before we end the meal, remember that piece of matzah we put away at the beginning of the meal because we're like poor people who don't know where our next meal is coming from? Well, we do something interesting. We take it out then and we eat it. What are we doing? I thought I put it away because I don't know where my next meal is coming from, so I have food for tomorrow. Yes, but that was when we were slaves at the beginning of the night. Now we're free men. I don't have to worry about where my next meal is coming from. So I take it out and I eat it now. Because if you were a poor person and you put away half of your food or more than half of it because you weren't sure where your next meal was coming from, and then someone came in and told you, oh, by the way, you just won the lottery, one of the things you might do is take that food out and finish it up, right? So we take it back out and we eat it, and then we finish up the meal. And after we finish up the meal, we move to the future part of the evening. What do I mean by the future part? We actually almost don't even mention the Exodus from Egypt anymore the rest of the night. There's still a lot of liturgy left, but it's all thanks and praise to God and speaking about the Messiah coming, the redemption, the future. And we end the night with the one-liner, L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. That's the last line of the Passover Seder. The last line of the Passover Seder is next year in Jerusalem. It's a yearning for the future. So that's how the Passover Seder is set up. We have the experience of the history, of the suffering, of everything we've been through the generations, of God's redemptive hand in our lives, and then ultimately praising God with the Hallel Psalms, Psalms 113 through 118, and praising God for everything he's done for us and yearning for the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem one day. That is the Passover Seder. I'm going to kick it over to Rami in a second to close us out, but I just want you to appreciate what this is and bring it into your own life. I find that one lesson that I always try to impart to Christians is to see God in history. You see, our relationship to God really operates in two different modes, and that's for Jews and Christians alike. And they're both good. One of them is the private mode, my prayer life, my family needs, my own needs, my own sins and virtues and my standing before God, what's going to happen to my soul after I die. All of those personal aspects of a life of faith are very important. They're very important. They're very intimate. We have to have a strong personal relationship to God. But if you open up the Bible and you read, that's not what it's about for the most part. It's about history. There's wars, there's nations, there's this big plan, there's prophecy, right? There's politics. There's a lot going on in the Bible that is really about the world and God's governance of the world. And the Passover Seder, and that's another area of life where we have to develop a strong sense of faith in God of the big picture, God of the world, God of history. And what is our role in that? And why was I born into the time period I was born into? What responsibilities do I have to God in the historical sense? And very often when Christians first visit Israel, Jews too, when people first visit Israel, because there's so much of that history there, you have the modern and the ancient, and the whole sweep of history hits you in the face when you get to Israel. Very often that part of people's life of faith, Jews and Christians alike, is ignited when they visit Israel because it touches all of that. Passover is about that. Passover is about connecting us with the God of history. That's what I opened the evening with. It's the God of order, seder. That's what this evening's about. It's recognizing that all of the chaotic, disconnected parts of history are not chaotic and disconnected. There's a seder. There's an order to everything. God is in control. And that's what gives us faith to move on and to say with confidence that at some point in the future, L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, that Jerusalem will be fully rebuilt with the temple at its center. We don't know how, we don't know when, but we have trust that the God of history is in control and he will bring that ultimate redemption to us all. Rami, over to you.
Thank you. And once again, before I play I just want to put out that request. I see many people have donated and contributed. Remember, this is really helping the poor of poor of Israel that are going into these holidays, for a box of matzah, even though it's right over there, go get it, but it's quite expensive and it's difficult for everybody. Obviously, there are difficult times, but I always know there's always that feeling of that I always have, and the prayer that I always say, my personal prayer to God, is let me be part of the solution. Let me be one of those people who can always be a giver, and whatever that giving amount. Sometimes it's been a lot, and sometimes it's been a little, but that I should always be on the giving side. So thank you to so many of you, and we will sing next year in Jerusalem. Next year in Jerusalem, we will have the rebuilt temple, and with that temple, we will be able to bring the Paschal Lamb, and we will have a rebuilt Jerusalem. So thank you, everyone, and let's sing a little bit. Hey, Lashana, Lashana haba beYerushalayim.
Next year in Jerusalem, folks. That's what he's singing.
beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Lashana haba beYerushalayim. beYerushalayim Hallelujah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I see someone's looking for the link to donate. It is in the bottom left corner. You can just click on it there. You'll see it says Feed the Needy this Passover. Please just click on it. I saw someone ask where they can see the link. Maybe we should email it out, but I know if you go to Israel 365 Charity, you can also see how to give there. Israel365charity.com.
And hopefully tomorrow, I'll be sending out a copy of this webinar for anyone to share, and I'll have a link there as well. So thank you all so much for joining. Wishing you all a Chag Kasher B'Sameach, a happy Passover, and please feel free to reach out to myself, and I'll connect you with Rabbi Pesach. If you have any questions, it is Rami, R-A-M-I, at Israel365.com. And thank you all so much for joining. All the best. And
let me just add in one sentence before you hang up, Rami. Is everyone still on?
Yeah.
You know, when we're praising God for our own redemption from slavery to freedom, right now in the world, we need to be praying for the Iranian people, the Persian people who are being oppressed and who are yearning for their freedom. We also need to be praying for all the persecuted Christians in Africa and elsewhere who are being oppressed for their faith and are yearning for their freedom. There are still many, many people in the world who have not yet come from slavery to freedom, and we need to use the energy of Passover to yearn for their freedom as well.
Thank you. Amen. And let us pray for that. All the best.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.